Good evening, and welcome to this evening's invitation-only special event. Tonight, we're going to be sharing with you an exciting new service brought to you by some of the profession's leaders when it comes to compliance, risk management, Medicare, and really the things you need to know to keep your practice moving the way you want and help you focus on patients. My name is Aaron Reynolds, and I have the distinct pleasure of being your host this evening, but the real information is going to come from this evening's panelists. You're going to have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Ray Foxworth, from Dr. Steve Conway, from Dr. Scott Munsterman, and then I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Stephen Abitable. And between the team of them, we're going to help you understand truly what ChiroArmor is and how you can reimagine compliance. You might be saying, truly, what is this ChiroArmor thing? You've gotten the mailer, you've had a phone call, and you've been invited into this evening's special event. But in its simplest form, it's an exclusive hands-on compliance service where we focus on compliance, quite honestly, so you can focus on your practice. To kick off our evening, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ray Foxworth so he can share a little bit from the business standpoint of why outsourcing compliance or having a true compliance partner is so very important to the successful business practices that we'd all like to see and adopt. Dr. Ray?
Thank you, Aaron, and welcome everyone. I want to ask you a question. What's your one thing? What's the one thing that you do in your office that no one else can do unless you have staff doctors? And it's taking care of patients, adjusting patients. And at the end of the day, with 2 practices and 3 doctors in my office, I want the doctors and staff focused on taking care of patients and doing that alone. When you measure the cost of do-it-yourself compliance, you're losing money each and every minute, hour, and day that you're not focused on patient care and generating revenue. You can delegate some compliance duties to staff, but do not abdicate your responsibility for compliance. Whether you are a do-it-yourselfer and have staff assistants, understand the true cost, not just the financial cost, but the distraction and the fear factor of, am I really doing this right? So, do you want to know what the cost of compliance is in your office? I'll give you a formula. What's the gross revenue billed in your office a year? And if you're in the clinic 40 hours a week, divide that number by 2,080 hours. That's how many work hours there are in a 52-week year. And then what is your collection ratio? The national average is 72%. Your gross revenue times your collection ratio is what's called your net revenue per hour. And quite frankly, if you're working less than 40 hours a week, then your net revenue per hour will actually be higher. Now, let's put it into real life. In my practice, each doctor, along with the staff, are able to generate about $346 an hour. You run the math on the collection rate, and they are netting about $249 an hour. Every hour in the office doing things that do not generate revenue is not the highest and best use of our time or our staff's time. Unless we love compliance, does it make sense to focus on things that really suck the energy out of us and our staff? Or is there a way to reimagine compliance and focus on patient care to generate net collections of $518,000? So why should we start reimagining compliance? Simply because of the risks that are involved for non-compliance. You need to understand that a routine records request can be the start of an investigation, which leads to an audit, can lead to recoupments, fines, and penalties, some of which can be career-ending. Here are a few facts from one consultant that we work with who has done over 500 audits, all specifically in chiropractic. 67% were initiated by BUCA. For those of you that don't know that term, that's Blue Cross, United, Cigna, and Aetna. 24% by Medicare, 10% by boards of licensure. Mental, physical, emotional, and financial costs affect all of us, not just the doctor. You've also got to factor in legal costs, expert witness costs, the recoupments, and the fines and penalties. And all of these are typically above and beyond what the best malpractice policy can cover. And you know, I'd like to think that most of us could handle these paybacks, but unfortunately, I know way too many doctors that could not afford to write a check this size. Here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. 24% of the paybacks were in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. 14% went up to $150,000. 9% went to the $300,000 range. 7% were between $300,000 and $500,000. And then the poor guys, 2% of them were $500,000 plus range. Now ask yourself, if 56% of the paybacks were between $50,000 and $500,000, how many of us could write that check on demand? Forget about the 2% being over $500,000. If 54% of the paybacks were between just $50,000 and $500,000, even with a great malpractice policy in place, could you write a check to pay the refunds that you might owe? With recoupments as high as they are, does it make sense to have a $12 to $15 an hour staff member or you protecting your practice in all things compliance, or focus on patients and generating revenue? If you were buying a business, would you rely on the owner's internal audits or be more inclined to want to review an external audit by a third party? You see, there's this thing called self-reporting or self-disclosure. And while you can certainly do that, there are still fines and penalties that come along with that. As a medical compliance specialist with access to some of the best in compliance, I realized at the time and effort and drain it was on me and my doctors and staff. And you know, you got to understand, compliance is something that you can really do between patients. It really does require time and, most importantly, a skill set that most of us do not have. Here's a lesson I learned in life, thinking I'm a kind of a do-it-yourselfer guy. I used to sail a 1977-foot sailboat, and I made a mistake of chartering a catamaran once. And then I decided I'm going to get a captain's license because I don't want to have to spend the $2,000 on hiring a captain. So I read through 2 books and a number of hours in that, 5 8-hour days on a boat where I'm in the engine room to the bilge pump and charting passages and courses manually, and then a grueling 3-hour pass or fail test. The time, effort, energy, and money was well spent because I learned this lesson. The next time I charter a catamaran, I'm still going to hire a captain. And why would I do that? Because I don't want to be responsible for all of that. I just want to be able to spend time enjoying myself and my family and friends. So compliance reimagined is just like that. I need to know about these things, but I would much rather just practice.
I very much enjoyed the business approach that Dr. Ray takes. And for those of you who read through the brochure, one of the things you'll remember that we talked about was when you take a look at the medical model outside of chiropractic, so many of the offices have been able to come together and consolidate and split these costs. In the chiropractic profession, it just doesn't work that way. And that's part of the driver behind this. We certainly don't want our doctors to be in the position that Dr. Ray just shared with you, but more importantly, we want you to have that vision of that boat on the bottom where you understand that there's a team behind you taking care of you. Someone who's truly been in the trenches quite a few years now dealing with this and has some very unique stories is going to join us next. Dr. Conway, I'd love for you to share maybe a story or two about what it is you see on a daily basis while you're working with doctors, especially from a Medicare perspective.
Thanks, Aaron, and welcome everybody. I look forward to talking with you tonight. I've had the privilege of working with chiropractors across the United States for the past 7 years, actually for a long time, but really more focused with this compliance in the last 7 years. And I'm doing these seminars, and I'll have an auditorium of easy 800 some chiropractors in the room where they could be choosing some other more fun, if you want to say more sexy type subject than compliance, but they're there. And I'm starting to wonder really what's happening with it. And it's really that chiropractors want to do the right thing. They basically love their patients and they're very strong. They have a strong focus on their patient care. But what I'm finding out and seeing nationally is chiropractors are not as dedicated or really strongly focused when it comes to documentation or compliance until it's too late. And that's the key factor that's been out there. I have these DCs who are wonderful people, and they basically are raising their hands and they're asking me these questions, and everyone else in the audience is thinking the exact same thing. You know, I'm listening to what this guy's saying because this is happening in my clinic. And they're basically asking this question that they, I'm listening to it and every red flag in the world is going off, right? Everything, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking they have no clue in the world that they're committing all these compliance issues because they just didn't know. And they really are just honestly just trying to find the right way to do it. So the hard part is, the most difficult part is, and I deal with this weekly, is I'll have chiropractors call me up. And it usually happens when they get like a letter from Medicare or an audit letter. It could be a subpoena. It could be, all these different things. I have clients that basically have the United States Department of Justice call them. And when they get these letters, only then do they start to realize, I really didn't know what I was doing and I could be in a boatload of trouble here. And then the emotional part of it starts to come in, and it's very hard for these chiropractors. All of a sudden I start to see, the fear that comes in, the anger. It sometimes it's even down to despair, where they're just like, I don't even know if I can sleep, and when can this end? The question is always like, when does this end? And I have to tell them, I said, some of these things are going to take 2 or 3 years. And they're like, I don't even know if I can make it, and to the point where they're asking me questions. I think I have to get out of the profession. I just can't make it. So a lot of my job is actually encourage him, stay in the game, keep working it. But I can't overemphasize really the emotions that really come with this when it happens to you. Up to that point, you may not even know you're swimming piranhas in this river, but when they start nibbling at your toes and when they snag on, all of a sudden your entire world changes. And so what I'd like to do tonight is actually just kind of give you, if you can go to the next slide for me too, Christy, I want to go into an example for you, because this is basically, and next one, please. I want to give you an example because this one is going to hit home, and it's hitting home everywhere I go. This is, and you can look this up, so it's on the internet, it's on the web, so you can pull it up, but it's U.S. Department of Justice. So this is a very severe case, serious case too, that came in, and this is a doctor, it's actually Dr. Brown. He's a super nice guy. This is, a lot of times chiropractors tend to think when this person's being audited, it's like some outlier. It's not me, it's not my clinic. I couldn't relate to this, but I want you to understand, he is like every single chiropractor in the United States. That's why this is so important, and I bring this up at every seminar I go to. And Dr. Brown is a great guy. He's in Iowa, and he is he was a second-generation chiropractor. He loves his patients. He's in there doing the best he can. And unfortunately, Dr. Brown got this call and this letter from the U.S. Department of Justice. And if you read the thing here that I have on the screen here, really is what we ended up with. He agreed to pay close to $80,000. This talks about what Ray was talking about, some of those numbers. But that's what we worked this down to. They were actually in the beginning looking at taking his license. So this is a thing where they actually wanted to take his license. We were looking at extraordinarily high numbers of fees that they want to impose on Dr. Brown. And again, it all violating with this False Claims Act is what they are working with. But his life was just turned upside down because all of a sudden this is what he was dealing with. So if you can hit the next slide, I want to give you an idea of really what was going on in this clinic. And so really what they did, and the source of the complaint was unknown. We don't know who did it. But basically what they said is, Dr. Brown, we believe that you're doing inducement by providing free services to Medicare patients. The free services he was doing, guys, was basically on some of his patients, not all of his patients, he was giving them 3 to 5 minutes of electrical stimulation. It was like a TENS unit, things like that. A couple other free things where he was actually just helping the patients. Wasn't on all of them, just a couple of them. And this was he was doing for both AT, and you guys know AT is active treatment, and he was also doing it for maintenance. So it wasn't just exclusively for those people that were on getting paid by Medicare. Then that's about it. I mean, there wasn't a lot else in this whole thing. And so we started working with this and started dealing with this. And this was such a big case, I actually had to bring in experts and other firms from around the United States to help with this, because these people had already been in the Department of Justice. These are attorneys that were within that, coming in to help me with this, because I wanted to contain this as much as I could, because this is really going to touch, I would believe, every single chiropractor in the United States, because it's hard for me to see yet, but it's rare that I find a chiropractic office that has not provided some sort of free service to a Medicare patient. And it could be a free exam. It's very common that I see. I see free therapies that chiropractors are doing. X-rays, not as common, but I have seen that in the past. So it's basically every single office that I know out there has potentially provided a free service to Medicare patients. So with this one case, what happened was they came in and they basically said, this is something you can't do. And I think chiropractors kind of know this. It might have been on their radar a little bit, but to the degree that you could actually lose your license, and we were looking at millions of dollars that they wanted to have paid back. This was a big, big case. We negotiated down to the other number. But basically, every single chiropractor in the United States has to understand that they cannot provide any free services to Medicare patients, including examinations, therapies, or treatments. It's a big deal. So again, for you tonight, if you're on this call tonight or looking at it later, I need you to actually look in your own office and your own procedures. This may be one of those things you're thinking, oh, maybe not that big a deal, but it actually is a big deal. And when they come calling on your door and these things happen, it's traumatic for chiropractors. And I think that was basically what I had on that we're going to talk about tonight. So basically what I want you, the other thing is what he was working with too on this was down coding. And so a lot of chiropractors believe that if I down code my codes, they won't come looking for me, but obviously you're actually on the radar even more. So coding is a big deal. Knowing what to charge and not charge for is a big deal. And the help with ChiroArmor, what I'm excited about with ChiroArmor is these are things that we actually look at. These are things that we're going to look inside your practice, make sure that you have all these policies, all these procedures incorrectly, because this one I bring up because you may actually think it's okay to do, because you think, who else? Everyone's doing it, so I think I'm okay doing it. But I want you to truly understand it's not, and it's a very significant thing that you have to change within your office. Aaron, is that helpful?
Yeah, I think you brought up some great points, and it's really, I don't know about upsetting, but it's truly unsettling that here you have a doctor just trying to do the right thing, take care of patients with something as small as STEM, and yet you had to bring in everybody to try and defend them. And I think that's it. It's the difference between kind of being proactive and reactive. It's also understanding that as utilization rates rise, that as we move into more of a wellness-based world, we've got the opioid epidemic, we're driving to chiropractic more and more and more. We have to be even more careful so we can certainly manage that shift in public perception as well. So certainly we appreciate the work that you do. And more importantly, I'm sure Dr. Brown appreciates the work that you and all of your colleagues did on his behalf. So the next question becomes, kind of, now that I know that there's this challenge and I know that there's this problem, what do I do? What do I have to look for? How can I stay on top of all of that? And does it make good business sense? And for that, I'd like to go to Dr. Scott Munsterman, because he has really put the time, the effort, and the energy into putting this program in place for you to truly walk away and focus on patient care. And I think you're sensing a recurring theme from us. We want you focused on patients so we can focus on the compliance, and we happen to have that happy relationship going forward. So, Dr. Munsterman, if you don't mind, share some steps or at least high-level things that a practice needs to look for if they want to manage this on their own or have us manage it for them.
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. And I appreciate so much the business perspective that Dr. Foxworth has really brought to the equation, and of course the legal perspective of Dr. Conway. And it does cause us to say, what is this thing that we need to get our arms around? Well, the OIG laid out the 7 key requirements that any practice needs to have when it comes to compliance. And so we're talking about maybe compliance from a 30,000-foot view. What kind of a program do I need to have in place? Well, first of all, you need to designate a compliance officer. So whether it's you, a staff person, or outsourcing, you need to have that designated compliance officer. Second, you have to have a commitment to make sure that the communication lines are open within your clinic and have that culture of compliance created where every staff person, including providers, are on board with understanding compliance. Thirdly, you have to understand what standards that you need to comply with from the perspective of OSHA. What are those requirements? Do you have a bloodborne pathogen policy in place, emergency action plan in place, and a number of things? Do you have all of your HIPAA privacy security safeguards in place? Are you practicing those? Looking at the employment law perspective, do you have all the key aspects covered there from the labor law perspective? Medicare, Medicaid, we've touched on a couple of things here already that Dr. Conway stated, as well as the coding and billing documentation requirements that are there in terms of guidelines and approaches. And we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a policy do you have created around those standards? And so those standards, very important. The fourth aspect is the monitoring and auditing process. Out of these standards and these policies that we sometimes have on our shelf, unfortunately, some of it, shrink wrap is still on it. Let's be truthful. What are we supposed to be doing in our practice? Well, there's a vast number of procedures and processes that are in those policies that need to be put into play, and that's called our monitoring and auditing process. And then how do we train our staff, the new hires that come on versus the ongoing nature of training that we need to have on a periodic basis with our current staff to reach that culture of compliance? And then how do we respond to violations? And then lastly, how do we enforce disciplinary standards? All of that comprises your compliance program. And so when clients come on to us, they pretty much get naked in front of us when it comes to their policy. And believe me, it does not look pretty. Very few have any policy in regards to, well, very few, if any, have any OSHA policy. A few have had a page and a half of employment policy. We have some HIPAA policy that some folks have had, but it's in the shrink wrap, let alone not really understanding the other coding, billing, documentation that Dr. Conway has already talked about. And so what we have done here through ChiroArmor is we put together the system. We first wrap policy around you, and it's very specific to the needs of your practice. You can go ahead and click to the next screen there, Christy. And so we have created within our system easy access to those. We walk you hand by hand through all the policy procedures so that you have an intimate understanding of that. We help train a compliance liaison within your practice that we work one-on-one with to get that process down. And then the next slide, we'll be able to show you all of the different aspects of the compliance program. And so I know this looks like a mess of a screen, but you know what? These are the things that you need to have in place. There are various processes and various aspects of each particular policy, whether it's HIPAA, OSHA, employment law, and the like. And then, of course, the monitoring and auditing process that I referred to. Once we have policy and procedure in place for you, tailored to your practice, I might add, then we need to make sure we do the policy. We have to do the policy. That's where many practices fall short. They may have maybe a halfway decent policy, maybe, but when it comes to actually doing it, that's a whole nother story. And so the next slide actually begins to show you the key areas that come out of policy that we have systematized each month, and we meet with you monthly to make sure that these jobs get done in the practice. That's on us to help you to take that load off of you so that you have the capability to be able to spend time on patients and make the dollar per hour average that Dr. Ray talked about that you need to as a business. And so we do that through compliance spotlights. We have a number of various methods that we utilize within our system to help you gain control of this area of your practice. And of course, the training per those regulatory standards, very key, and they are all pulled together on a very systematized, organized calendar approach, scheduled approach. And you have access to us as professionals, as experts. The one thing I would just add in working with clients, and they've really become much more aware of the whole process once we've arrived, if you will, into the compliance program, where they're actually doing compliance in their practice. They've realized that they could never hire one person in their staff for the $15 an hour or even $30 an hour that has intimate knowledge of all these key areas like the team that ChiroArmor has brought forward to you. So with that, Aaron, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that's some great information, and certainly I like you clarifying on that slide. There is a lot of stuff there. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, that most doctors don't realize how many little pitfalls there can possibly be in thinking that you're compliant. And that's kind of what you see. It's almost like giving someone a tool. And if the tool's used the right way, boy, you can get a lot done with it. But if you use the tool the wrong way, you can really almost get yourself in more trouble. And that's why this systemic approach is so important. Also, what I think we know is when you know something's coming, when you have a schedule, it creates natural peace of mind. I just don't have to worry about it. So I greatly appreciate some of the information that you guys have been sharing in general. I want to we talked about business a little bit. Not everyone's going to run a practice like what Dr. Ray has. Not everyone has multiple sites. Not everyone has multiple doctors. So here's just a simple chart I want you to look at. Let's assume that you're putting 20 hours of compliance in a month, which is about a good number, about an hour a day to stay on top of everything, 20 hours, and you're a $100 per hour clinic. At 20 hours a month, or 20 hours per month, yes, at $100, that's $2,000 a month, or $24,000 annually. That is for a relatively small practice. So it's not so much about where we're moving our money, it's more about where do I generate my revenue from, and where's a good place to invest for peace of mind. So just a $100 per hour practice to stay compliant will cost you about $24,000 annual hard cost. And the hard cost is important. I'm going to get into that here in just a second, because there are the three types of costs that we want to take a look at and the impact that they have on you. The hard cost, the soft cost, the emotional. If you're coming in at $300 per hour in your practice, you can see your total cost of compliance is $90,000 or $72,000. If you have multiple doctors in your practice and you guys are a $750 per hour practice, you've got a $180,000 annual cost. That's what it's going to cost you from a hard cost. So I'm sharing some of this with you because if you're not used to outsourcing or you wonder about the value of it, that's the best way to look at it. What do I do when I'm in my wheelhouse? How do I generate those revenues? And where's the best place and use of my time and energy? And that's what's so important about ChiroHealth, or what I should say about ChiroArmor. Certainly excited to partner with the ChiroHealth USA team, but it's the expertise from risk management that leads us into the ChiroArmor side of things, and that's why we're excited about the product. You heard me mention about hard costs, soft costs, and emotional costs. If you don't know what that means, and Christy, I'll have you go to the next piece, thanks. What I want you to think about is your hard costs they're very clean. Soft costs, they're different. They're the instead of costs. Instead of focusing on patient retention, I'm doing this. Instead of focusing on practice building, I'm doing this. So those are kind of the soft costs. And then it's the emotional cost. That emotional cost is the challenge. That's the deal breaker. When you're preoccupied, you're not at your best, and everybody knows. And that's the piece where Dr. Conway comes in. He shared one story with you, but I've heard him sharing stories with us. And it's truly the emotional cost that we hear over and over and over and over again. We can work the hard costs off. We can reallocate some of those soft costs, but the long-term impact of those emotional costs can be detrimental to the practice. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We wanted to try and give you as much information as we could in a 20 to 30 minute window. I want to let you know that it doesn't stop here. For one, we're going to stay on the line. These experts will stay on the line, and we're going to answer as many questions as we can this evening. So feel free to start typing them into your chat log, and we'll do our best to address them. Every once in a while, we might come across a question that might confuse the audience a little bit. So we'll ask to take that question offline, but for the most part, we're going to be able to answer everything that you have. I also want to introduce you to Dr. Steve Avidable. He's been quietly sitting there this evening. He's been through a Medicare audit in his practice. He's come out very clean on the other side. He worked directly with Dr. Conway and other folks. So he has some tales from the trenches. But more importantly, the reason you need to know him, he's going to hold your hand through this process. Everything you need, he's going to be your point of contact. He'll help you get you to the right people in the right time frame, because we know time is valuable. You've heard us talking about that today. So as you see, Dr. Avidable's information is there. Feel free to call him at any point in time. I can't promise I'll always answer, but I can promise I'll always get back to you as quickly as possible. So with that, we're going to transition now into the question and answer portion of today's ChiroArmor special event. But again, we want to thank you for your time, for your attention, and for hearing this message tonight, because we're excited to share with you what compliance reimagined feels like. So with that, we'll get to our first question.